Hello friends, welcome back. Today is Thursday the 24th of April 2025. Yesterday I did a video following on the death of Pope Francis. I waited today and on the day after he died, I did a video, but with respect to someone who has passed away. I spoke mainly about the papacy in general terms. And yesterday I did another one, posted another video about my thoughts about his papacy, his person. And it has received quite a number of views. I thought that no one would be terribly interested, actually, but amazingly, a lot of people are viewing it. And for the most part, I read all your comments, by the way, but there are some who think that I am attacking the church by criticizing the man. And the man is not the papacy. And I think I made it, I said it very clearly, I made it very clear that it is not the church that I am attacking. But I was speaking out of the pain that I feel for the division in the church. It is not all his fault or his fault. It has been coming for a long time, but certainly I think he added to the division. And so I think it is important to bring it out. It is not out of disrespect for him or the church that I am saying this, but I think it is important to say it now. Why now? Because we know that most bishops, most priests, the great majority, cardinals, archbishops, have never said anything against his policies or his statements or many things that he has said. And to practically nobody. The very few that have said something, and many know that things that he said many times with very little prudence were wrong. And some of the statements were even heretical. And I'm going to deal with that today. The few that have spoken out were people in the church who perhaps were retired or did not have a diocese, did not have that responsibility. The only person I can think of that spoke out was, and I mentioned him yesterday, was Bishop Joseph Strickland of the Tyler Diocese, and I spoke about him a little bit. He was the only one who really had something to lose. I'm sorry to use that expression, but it's not that the others had nothing to lose, but he was the one who immediately was deposed of his diocese and so on. So now, at the moment, we have a sede vacante because the Pope died, and the next one has not been elected yet. So if there is a time for someone to speak out, is now. Now to speak out, because if another pope is elected who continues on the road that Francis embarked upon, we may have that for another 20 or 25 years, who knows. So I think it is important that if they have something to say, in all sincerity, they should speak up now. I think we have to bring to light what has been happening. Because not, as you can imagine, not all of those who critique what has been happening is because we hate the church, dislike the church, or anti-Catholic. Not on the contrary, but we have to speak the truth, because the church has never been so divided as it is now. I also spoke yesterday about the Chinese Cardinal Zen. You remember that he is in his very, very elderly, in his 80s, I suppose, or perhaps even 90s. I'm not sure, but he's very elderly. How he came to the Vatican and waited 3 days to be received. And he wasn't, after he has spent his life with so much sacrifice in China, looking after the few faithful there, imprisoned for 30 years and so on, and came to the Vatican and wasn't received. I mention him again because he spoke out yesterday, as he should, if he sees that there is something perhaps untoward, or even if there isn't anything untoward that is happening at the moment, in order to prevent it in any case. Because I think it's Cardinal Farrell, the one in charge at the moment, right? He's an Irishman, naturalized American, but he is he has a post. He was the closest one to Secretary of State, I think, and he was the closest one to Pope Francis, and he convened the conclave, and to start the day after, immediately, very, very quickly, and Cardinal Zen spoke out saying, this is not right. Not everyone can get there the day after, from all parts of the world. The ones who were there were the Germans and the people from Europe, yes, but everybody else who has to come from Africa, from Asia, to just say this is starting tomorrow. And indeed it started. They call it plenary, but it has to be a preliminary because there was only a third, I think, of the cardinals there, and they started. So he called that out, but he made it. Somehow he made it. And so I believe that Cardinal Müller also made it, and Cardinal Zara from Africa is also there. So at least, at least the two factions, as it were, of the church are there to begin with. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about his legacy. In very general terms, I would say that his legacy is the very, very passionate implementation of Vatican II. The other popes after Vatican II did, of course, continue, but they were a little bit more prudent. For example, Benedict XVI tried to at least say that the immortal Mass was to be allowed, and he didn't go all the way. But there were Pope Francis was very, very active in practically shutting everything down to do with tradition. So very passionate implementation of Vatican II. And he was very much dedicated to that mission and to that aim. And I said very clearly that I think the ultimate aim is the destruction of the Catholic Church from the inside. he really pushed the envelope as far as he could. And I did also say that I had he been younger, he would have achieved his aim of converting the Catholic Church into the globalist universal church, where there are no differences at all. It's just, you know, everybody's the same, all religions are the same. One may argue on that, you know, if you say that Christianity is the same as everything else, as every other religion, then you see that has consequences. It sounds good, okay, but it is not if you're a Christian, because then what was the point of the incarnation? Christianity is different in that the triune God, the Trinity, the Son, incarnated. So our God is a personal God. The other religions do not have that. Religions are different. Yes. So just to make a blank statement that all religion, it leads to confusion. You have to be prudent. It leads to a lot of confusion. Well, then why do I have to be this or that? It doesn't matter. Perhaps it doesn't even matter not to have a religion. In other words, it has consequences. And for you or me, or, you know, just an ordinary person to just say things that we don't feel that the necessarily implications or consequences of that. But for the Pope, I think he has to be much more careful, and I don't think he was. And so what is going to happen now is that another Pope is going to be elected. As I said yesterday, 80% of those cardinals he had appointed himself. And I read you a few biographical notes of just 4 of them, just, you know, and those 4 were very concerned with inclusion and diversity and climate change and this and that. But I didn't see any sense of Christ or salvation of souls or transcendence or the Catholic faith there. It was like an NGO. This is the problem. What is going to happen next? Francis took the church as far as he could in that ultimate end. I don't know how it can get worse. It could. I mean, you know, you can turn the Vatican into a casino, or, you know, people start dancing there and just say that this is all nonsense. I mean, you know, the ultimate point hasn't been reached yet, but my goodness, almost. So the question is, are they going to double down? That, how do they call it? The never mind. That one faction that followed Francis, or are they going to perhaps take a step back for a while? We don't know. It is important. I say all this, and I say it with great pain. I feel no happiness, joy, glee, or anything about talking about this division and this confusion, but it has to be brought to light. Okay, so beginning with from the very beginning, when Francis was elected Pope in 2013, and he was there at the balcony there, and look at the pictures, because already you saw that something was very different. He was there like that. There were no smiles whatsoever. just like that, looking at the people. He was not wearing the usual stole or the usual, what they wear. This was going to be different. I felt that. But in any case, the day before, we saw him coming out of the hotel where he had slept that night before the election, and going to pay his hotel bill. And all the cameras were there. And the Humble Pope campaign started and lasted for the whole duration of his papacy. And now we see, as I said yesterday, the media who have everybody, certainly all the people on the globalist side of politics, are all calling practically for his canonization. It is Catholics who are in pain because we don't know what is going to happen next. Of course, a lot of Catholics are not aware. They just know that there is a Pope in Rome, and they don't necessarily pay any attention. And that is understandable. It happens the same in politics, doesn't it? It's when you follow, what happens practically every day or every week, that you are aware of things that most people don't have the time. There was one Italian journalist called Eugenio Scalfari, who was a very well-known journalist in Italy. He passed away. He was very old. He was already in his 80s. And Pope Francis, from the very beginning, started inviting him to his place in Santa Marta, where he lived, because he also didn't want to live in the same place as other popes had lived. And he would call him, and they would meet, and Pope Francis would talk. And he would say strange things. From the very beginning, they sounded very strange. He would say things to him like, oh, hell doesn't exist, for example. There is just a sort of a disappearance of souls, and the kind of strange things. And Mr. Scalfari then would report about it. He had the authority to then write about it. And of course, the statements were so strange and so different. What? That you would have a conversation and arguments in Italy about, he couldn't have said that. No, that was and then, of course, Eugenio Scalfari is very old and he's not recording this, okay? So he could have, not remembered properly, or, didn't read his notes properly, and so on. So there was an out there, which is understandable, okay? So that would go on for about a week. But then he would be called again, and he would go again, and he would come back with something else that he said. For example, those who persist in adultery or living together, actually, is he was trying to say that it would become almost like common law in the eyes of God, is the best response that can be given to God. What? Okay, so so then the journalist would report on this again with his approval, and people would start talking, what, but, okay, so say that once or twice he could have misunderstood what he said or taken things out of context or something, but he kept inviting him. And he was aware of the controversies afterwards. He was, those who persist in adultery that is when you persist on it, that is the best response that can be given to God. That's turning the tables, as if divine law was so difficult and was so impossible for us to fulfill that why would God ask us that kind of thing? So actually, almost if you start debating it and thinking about it, you end up with God is being unjust, asking us to do something that it is impossible, when all we are doing is a question of women of people's weakness, but not necessarily of the injustice of God. Yes, we are weak. Is the the easiest sins that we can commit. But to say that then, if you persist in it, is as if, it hadn't happened. I could say that, but not the Pope. Okay. So I think that he was actually enjoying this. Why was he doing this? Was he doing this on purpose? I think it was a tactic that he actually perhaps even enjoyed. Because you see, by saying it like that to a journalist, all these things that he was coming up with, like a politician, you actually are left with a tiny little bit of plausible deniability. You see, there is always that doubt, the journalist got it out of context. But he would say it, he would, get it out. Another thing, so that is at the very beginning. Another thing that I think I mentioned to you many, many months ago was that how I didn't know how I felt when I saw him in that video. And that was a little boy who is there in church. The boy is about 10. And the Pope is coming in, so he's there sort of like this, with his hand like this, in prayer, sort of very nice and, pious kind of thing. Okay. And looking at the Pope and sort of praying like this. And Francis approached him. And yes, he made a little bit of a joke, but he also let it out. He said to him, He took the hands apart and he said, "Are your hands stuck together?" And separated them. I felt at the time that was too much for a young boy who's just there all pious like. Your hands stuck together? It's always a bit off. When he was there at the balcony, not a smile, not a wave. I don't know. Anyway, so what we got from him were words. I'm taking this from a video that I saw, and I said I'm going to just quote them, which is what is the video called? It's called Novus Ordo Watch. I'm going to, all the videos that I'm going to refer to here, I'm going to put them down in the description box, okay? So this is from Novus Ordo Watch. And the gentleman is saying, what we got from him were practically never words about the faith, words about transcendence, words about Jesus Christ. There were words like, we got a lot of words like encounter, tenderness, joy, migrants' dignity. He talked a lot about journeys and mercy and clericalism and the peripheries. And he talked a lot about horizons, fraternity, indifference. And he talked a lot about touching the wounded, caressing the elderly, including the marginalized. And we heard a lot about the God of surprises, the smell of the sheep, the cry of the earth. And we heard a lot about walking together, welcoming migrants, accompanying the wounded. We heard a lot about warming hearts, showing rigidity. The traditionalists, they were rigid. How many times they are rigid, frigid. He talked about dreaming of the future. He talked about tearing down walls and building up bridges. And of course, he talked about moving forward. Okay. Those journalists who covered his papacy period say that there were so many strange things that he was saying that it was very difficult to keep up with them. It was like, 2 or 3 kind of scandals a week. You couldn't keep up with them. There is actually a book written already in 2016, and the title is What Pope Francis Really Said. That's the title, by Tom Hoopes, Hoopes. Tom Hoopes. What Pope Francis Really Said. And this is written already in 2016. And about all these, lots and lots of quotes and things that he said, okay? So again, the reaction was, oh, well, these are misunderstandings. These things are out of context. Perhaps, he didn't express himself properly. He was having a bad day. Actually, about a bad day, I remember when I think it was I forget the name of the American filmmaker, Oliver Stone, sorry, who did the JFK movie. Yes, and he did in about 5, perhaps even more, or perhaps about 7 or 8 years ago now. He interviewed Putin in the Kremlin there, and one day he did a series of interviews with him, 4 or 5. And one day he had been waiting for quite a while, even though it was scheduled and so on, because Putin had been very busy, and when he came, they started talking, and yes, I had this meeting and that meeting and the other meeting and this and that. And Oliver Stone said to him, "You had a bad day." And Putin said, "No, I'm not a woman. I don't have bad days." Just remember. Okay. Okay. One thing that he did say, however, was, sorry, I was trying to find the right notes here. Okay, and this is what NovusOrdoWatch report. Just a few things. But it's not that all of them are heretical or scandalous. Some of them actually may not be that important, but it was so much of this every day, every week. And this commentator says, just to give you a sort of a quick example, 2013, he told the journalist he should just call him Jorge. This was at the very beginning, just call me Jorge. Okay, this is the problem, and this is not about him as a man, it's the office that he represents. It seemed, and more, as if he didn't understand, but how could he have not understood? At the end, it was almost contemptible the way I feel that he represented the office. He said that, again, sort of weird things. He said that he had a favorite exorcist who was a Lutheran. This journalist says that he can actually provide the whole documentation, and he actually provides it in his video, so I will put it down below. Another one. He redefined in a document the concept of truth. He kissed an occult crucifix on World Youth Day 2013 in Rio de Janeiro. And this is verifiable. Francis said that the Catholic Church needs Anglicans as Anglicans. He has said that if you are in an area where there is no Catholic Mass, but there is an Anglican Mass on a holy day, then you can go to the Anglican Mass and it is the same. This is not a small thing. Yeah. First of all, the Anglicans don't have the Mass, they have an Anglican service. Second, they don't have the Eucharist, in other words, the transubstantiation, yes, the Holy Presence. So it's a service, but it's not the Catholic Mass. Francis said that Martin Luther was not wrong on justification. Francis said that he had constantly used... Oh, no, another thing. For some reason... Where is it? Yes. For some reason, he used words sometimes that were very strange. And people wondered what they meant. For example, the word coprophagia. He was talking about the press, and he accused the press, the media, of engaging in coprophagia. What is that? Well, he used words like this. It's actually words used in the LGBT underworld community practices and so on. What does it mean? It means the act, which is a sexual act, really, the act of eating excrement or feces, either your own or someone else's, for sexual gratification. And he would use this word from the underworld of these communities. And that was not the only ones. So what on earth is going on here? Okay, Francis has cracked jokes about the Holy Trinity. In one of the books he composed as a cardinal, he joked about the crucifixion of our Lord. I'm sure it was obliquely, yeah. Francis said that Jesus becomes bread in the Holy Eucharist, that Christ is contained in a piece of bread. Have to be careful about the words. Christ does not become bread. Does not become bread. Careful with the words. Francis told people not to fear the Last Judgment. Understand fear, perhaps, to be concerned, yes? You're going to be judged. Unless you know and you're certain that you are absolutely pure and you need no cleansing or purification of any kind, perhaps you say, well, no. He believed in ecumenical martyrs. Again, you see, using words, many people can be martyrs about whatever they believe in. The martyr, Christianity used it always as a person who's willing to die for the faith. Cardinals wear red because symbolizes that they should be willing to die for Christ, if needed. To the Catholic Church, therefore, a person who dies for some other belief, they may perhaps be considered martyrs in their faith, but not in Christianity. Again, a lack of prudence here. When his friend Tony Palmer died in 2013, Tony Palmer was he was sort of an Anglican and an evangelical, sort of something in between, something like that. He was a bishop. And Francis said that he should receive a Catholic bishop's burial. Okay. So, he said many other things. Differences between religions are necessary. The worst sin a missionary can commit is to proselytize. The least serious sins are the sins of the flesh. Yes and no, yeah? That is made clear in the faith. Saint Augustine dealt with that. That the sins of the flesh were not the worst. Sins of the will were worse, in the sense that malice, he explained it. I don't remember the examples that Saint Augustine said, but for example, malice is worse than perhaps a one night stand or whatever it might be. Okay, but nevertheless, sins of the flesh are serious because, you see, to be malicious, you do exercise the will, yes, but to sin against the flesh, let's put it that way, all you need is a little bit of weakness. It's much easier to do that, you see. So we have to be careful that even though they're not the worst, they are the ones we start there, and then the rest follows. And who could forget the Pachamama? Yes, an idol, a pagan idol that he brought to the gardens of the Vatican there, and everyone knelt and everyone prostrated themselves before a pagan idol. And then he took it to the altar. If there is one thing that perhaps people will remember always about him, is that incident. That opened a lot of eyes. What is happening here? That and the virus thing, yeah, but that everyone was very surprised at that. And no one in the church's hierarchy said anything. So we hear a lot of these things, but we never heard him about the glory of God, the salvation of souls, the supernatural, our Lord Jesus Christ, the transcendence. There was as if no Catholic faith was evident, as if religion was not all that terribly important to him. What else did he say? Blasphemy. Yes, blasphemy is, he gave an example, hitting a woman is blasphemy. No. Sacrilege. Yes, there is such thing as sacrilege. What is it? A war. A war may be very bad, but it's not sacrilege. Moral obligation, no, he considered it rigidity. He always spoke about those traditional priests who want to celebrate the traditional mass, and it's all this rigidity. In other words, clinging to laws and to rules and to regulations. No, it's rigid. Except when talking about the environment and saving the planet, then that wasn't rigid. I'm sorry, I'm just telling you what I feel. And I don't think he was a humble man either. Of course, the campaign for being humble started when he walked out of that hotel room, and all the media never gave him a rough time at all. Very humble man. I don't think so. I don't think he was a humble man. I think he was mocking the church. I think he had the appearance of humility. He spoke a lot about the marginalized, all right, the excluded, reaching out to them. But you see, as this journalist, I'm quoting him, not quoting him exactly, but that you will see in the video if you care to watch it. He points out that you see what he was doing was to swap a group for another group. Because he certainly marginalized all the people who wanted the Catholic Church to be the Catholic Church of 2,000 years, and not the new church. And many went along with the Novus Ordo Mass and everything else, but with anguish in their heart, many of them. But in any case, he certainly marginalized. I told you in the other video how many good priests he excommunicated and defrocked because they said the immortal Mass. So he did marginalize. And this journalist, this commentator makes the point that you see, if you put as he called them, the peripheries, and you bring them to the center, what you're doing is at the same time pushing the center onto the peripheries. I think it's quite a good sentence, that. He certainly marginalized a lot of people. And he makes another very good point that I will mention, and I'll finish now. That the reaction of Catholics to Pope Francis has many manifestations. You have the Catholics who are not aware that there is a problem there, and they want in good faith to continue, and the Pope says this, okay, and that's it. But for those who are aware of what he has done and what he has said, he divides them into two. He says those who have tried to make Francis fit into the papacy, and those who have tried to make the papacy fit into Francis. And he explains it this way. The mainstream conservative but Novus Ordo, no problem with the Novus Ordo people, who have always tried, whenever he came out with these strange things and statements, they have always tried to sort of explain away anything disturbing or anything heretical many times. And went out of their way to argue, no, you see, misunderstandings, all this sort of thing. They know about, for example, his motu proprio Amoris Laetitia. Yeah, this is about communion for those who are remarried, all that. These people understand the papacy, and they know that it is not possible for the Pope to do that, or to say that about communion for those who the Church are in an adulterous relationship. I know it's old-fashioned, and I know everyone does it and everything else, but you see, the Church is there to say, no, this is still wrong. It's like your grandmother. No, you can't do that. Then you go and do it. But she has to maintain the doctrine of ever. And you can't adapt the faith to the world. That is the problem that we're having today. And so that is a group. And the other one is those who finally saw that to continue defending him was no longer sustainable, because there was so much of it all the time. Well, okay, and they realized if they were honest, they would have to say something or do something. They could no longer spin it, as it were. They tried to modify the papacy so that they could fit Francis into it. And so start explaining away. Anyway, both problematic, but I'm going to leave it there because I've been speaking for a while. I will probably do another one, because apparently there are two things also. I forgot to mention that I just heard in a Spanish video that actually when J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, came to see him, which was the day before, right, that he didn't actually want to meet him at all. He refused many times. And they almost had to persuade him, they had to convince him to receive him. And one can imagine that J.D. Vance, who who is a Catholic convert, when was that? 2019, that he had come to talk to him about, I don't know, a number of things, I suppose, but certainly about the state of the church in America, in the United States, and topics like that to do with the church. And he practically didn't allow it. He met him for not very long, and what he wanted to talk about was immigration. And there are other things that I have been reading which are very disturbing too, but I'm going to sort of just leave it there. And I can assure you, Catholics out there, that this is not in order to put down the church. The church has suffered tremendously throughout her life. It seems that every 400 years, every 500 years, is like she has to start anew. The 5th century, then the 10th century, East and West, then the Protestant revolution, and now we have another one. So it is a way of, I think, perhaps the Lord reminding us, hey, you're getting a little bit too uppity for, you have to go back to what is important and what your mission is. But the church, you see, has been battered so many times. I always say, when Catholics look at the Orthodox Church now with its pristine liturgy, and many just want to move and away from all these problems and so on. I don't think it's right, because you see, the way I see it is that the Orthodox Church has had her problems too. I mean, imagine last century, yes. For 70 years, absolutely prohibited, had to go underground and so on. I told you about Putin's mother, as a matter of fact. Putin is the 3rd child, and she had had 2 children before who had died. And when he was born, his mother actually found through a friend of a friend of a friend of another friend, a priest, hiding, obviously, and he took him to be baptized, and the priest did baptize him. So imagine what they went through. It was like the Catholic Church during the Protestant Revolution. I don't call it Reformation, because it wasn't a reform. It wasn't reform in the Catholic Church. It was leaving, right? So it's not a reform. But don't feel offended. It's just that I think it's a better definition. Yeah. So pretty much what the Catholic priests suffered here and in Germany, for example. But you see, the advantage, if we can call it an advantage, the advantage that the Orthodox Church had was that it was like it went into a closet, as it were, into hibernation, okay? And that's it. And then he came out alive, and very much alive, because people were waiting for some spiritual meaning in Russia. The churches are full there. But the Catholic Church is like a battered woman, The Orthodox Church is like this beautiful, gorgeous princess who is shut up in the tower, for years. But she still has her looks. The Catholic Church is like a battered woman. We started with the heresies at the very beginning and continued on and continued on and continued on. It's it's like a battered woman who is continuously battered, and at the moment is practically in a, on the ground in some trench somewhere, practically. And that is not when you leave her, because she will recover. God promised her that she would. But it's like, when you see your mother, imagine that your mother is the worst possible harlot, and people are stoning her to death. Or she is stoning herself in this case. But in any case, that's not the moment to leave. You may take her out and, try to help, but you cannot start stoning her, you too, So, no, I can't leave the church. I can't. I can't. So, she looks much worse than the Orthodox Church, for sure. She looks haggard and tired, black eyes and all the rest of it, but she will recover again, because she always has. With humility. But she has been the bullseye of so much hatred throughout the centuries that that's why. Anyway, I'm going to leave it here. Thank you for listening again. Bye-bye.